Hi everyone and welcome to another episode of How I Got In. I'm your host Karina. This week we're talking about the elite and beautiful University of Chicago. And with us today is Emily and Alex. Hi Emily. Hi Alex.
Hi.
Now briefly tell us about you guys. What year are you? What's your major? Any minors?
I guess I'll start. So we're twins, so we're both second years.
Second years now, yes.
Yeah, and I'm a bio major. I'm contemplating a couple of different ideas for minors. Maybe a Near Eastern Civilizations minor or a language of some kind. I haven't quite figured it all out yet. But that's me.
Right, so I'm Alex. I'm also a bio major, but I'm also picking up a philosophy major, which most people don't think go together very well, but it's what I'm interested in. So it's a lot of work, but the two majors definitely does work. So that's us.
That's an interesting combination, biology and philosophy. What do you guys want to go like more the medical field?
I
or
definitely
research side.
Sorry. I definitely intend to go to medical school, but so I mean for me, being pre-med is a little bit more. I wouldn't say difficult. It just has a an increased set of requirements that come along with it. So it's kind of helpful to know now that that's something I want to do. But
Yeah, I mean, I was considering going pre-med, but I want to do more research, and it's probably better off than to not be a pre-med and be able to spend my time in the lab doing a bunch of lab work after college. I go to med school, but get experience doing what I want to do, which I guess neuroscience. So.
Yeah, no, I had a friend once. We were creating a table of all the classes she needed to complete for her pre-med requirements. And I'm looking at it, I'm how are you supposed to finish all this, especially if the school had 120 credit hour cap? And I'm how does this work? It's just so many classes, and they're all extremely difficult. I see people studying for organic chemistry or chemistry, and I look at them and say, thank God I'm a business major, because I don't think I could do that.
I think we're both, slated to take OChem this year, and it'll be an interesting experience. I'm not really sure, how it'll go yet. But yeah, there are a fair amount of requirements that go along with being a bio major. And I mean, the cool thing about UChicago is that we have a common core, so there are a lot of different classes that you have to take, and you don't just focus on, your science. But it does make it more difficult because you do kind of have to figure out how to manage everything you need to take, because there's a whole host of other requirements.
Yeah, we have to take a bunch of, for that example, last year I take a class about sort of a general introduction to humanities, a language class that I personally have no interest in language, but they need us to take it. And this upcoming year I have to take a civilization class, a sociology class, and there's a whole bunch of science classes coming up that I have to take that, while I'm a science person, aren't in the fields of science I'm interested in, but they need us to take them. So it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, the gen eds are always interesting, and definitely I took one that was focused on the social aspects of everything that we do, and it was very interesting. But I tested out a majority of the general education requirements and stuff that isn't so much related to your major or any minor. So it gets on the annoying side, but also you never know what it's going to introduce you to, and I guess that's what they're kind of there for.
Mm-hmm.
So. We'll talk more about on the college aspect towards later part of the interview. Mm-hmm. Let's kind of look back at what you did throughout high school academic-wise. All schools are different. I started really early with AP classes. What was your academic schedule looking like your freshman year of high school?
Our freshman year, we had, I think, all the same classes.
Yeah. But we were the first, our school, it was the first year they were offering one AP for freshmen, seeing how it would go. So we both took it.
It was AP Human Geography, and it went well.
It was a little bit intense at times. Nobody had any idea what was going on, but we all managed to get through it eventually. But the professor hadn't really taught much AP because it was we're freshmen, it's a new thing.
Right. And then aside from that, we were in all honors except language, because we had just moved from a different school, and we were just starting Spanish. So we were in, I guess, intro to Spanish.
Yeah, I took Spanish my first year as well, and I also took AP Human Geography as one of my first AP classes, and I kind of feel you on that one. It's a lot of information, it's a lot of different information, and you're how am I going to remember all this for the exam?
Right. It's not like any other AP class, because thinking back on it, that was the only class I had not learned anything, any of the material beforehand. like most of the material in that class is completely new. Like,
Yeah, it's something you've never touched before.
It's a different way to think about everything, I think. So, it's a lot of assimilating to not just what is an AP class and like what is expected of you from an AP class, but hey, learn all of this new information too. But,
yeah, no, I completely agree. Now, moving into your sophomore year, what was your schedule looking like?
Oh wow.
I think, if I remember correctly, we were in AP World History, and then
Biology, AP Bio.
Yeah, we took AP Bio. That was the other one.
And then just like another
honors,
bunch of like regular classes. Some more Spanish, some more honors like chemistry that year.
Math.
And math too. Took both. What was it? Took both chemistry and AP Bio at the same time, which was a ton of fun. A lot of science.
Yeah, I mean, being a bio major, I do like my science, so I didn't really have an issue with that. I did have friends that looked at me and they were kind of like, "What are you doing? Why are you taking 2 science classes at once?" But I think part of high school, being able to choose your own classes for like the first time is figuring out what you like and actually playing to your strengths a little bit. So it worked out well for me.
No, I completely agree. When you're granted that flexibility to choose your courses for high school, you're like, do I want to challenge myself or do you not? And I was definitely given that opportunity to do so, and I'm glad I did it because that showed myself that I have control over what classes I'm taking, and I'm challenging myself if I'm doing well by doing that.
Right, I'm getting into like a whole bunch of like electives I wanted to take. Like you had to take art classes or something like that, and I managed to find my way into a debate class, which was a lot of fun. And it was great to be able to like figure out what it is I like to do.
Yeah.
I hadn't really gotten that before.
Although on the opposite side, for me, I fell into debate by accident. It was kind of a schedule thing. Because I was in a different class that I didn't really want to be in. It was a weight training class because it was one of the only classes that fit into my schedule, and it was going to be like a PE credit. But then I was the only girl in there, and I decided, I don't really want to be the only girl in a class. Like, that's not very fun because it was more like a free weightlifting class, and I wouldn't have anyone to like talk to. So the only other class that really fit into my schedule was a study hall or it was debate. And my mom, she kind of pushed me into being like, take something that's not study hall, take debate, try it out. And I mean, for me, I kind of fell in love with debate and it worked out well. So
no, that's great.
You don't necessarily know that you want to do. It's one of those things.
Do you think that taking 2 science classes, especially your sophomore year, kind of gave you an advantage when it came to, colleges looking back to see what you were doing throughout high school?
I think it definitely helped in the sense that it showed that I was interested in science and that, when they ask you on applications, like, what is your prospective major, what are you interested in, having the doubled science classes definitely supported the fact that, hey, I'm interested in being a biology major. This is something I want to pursue.
It makes it look like you're taking it seriously. It's like they do ask you what your major is. Like I imagine that they like look at what your class you've taken, what like your resume looks like in light of that, and saying you're interested in science would definitely look good to have taken more than one in a year. And so you show, hey, this person can manage the workload that comes from taking science in college and like the lab classes and like the research. So.
And I think it also kind of showed that I guess we both weren't really afraid to shy away from like a heavier workload because I mean we could have taken that extra slot and instead of filling it with the second science class like an AP Bio or AP Chem that would have been like extra, we could have filled it with like an art class or a music class or something else, but instead this is what we chose to do. So I think it makes a difference.
Yeah. Now, going to your junior year, a lot of people agree that junior year is your most important part of becoming a competitive college applicant. You're either gonna scale back and kind of not look as competitive, or you're gonna really up your game. What was your schedule looking like your junior year?
Junior year was the year things got a little stressful.
Yes.
Because also, I mean, where we went to school, there was options for IB or AP. So there was a little bit of time where we had to sit there and kind of consider, which track we wanted to take and which route would really work better for us. And I mean, we both eventually opted to take AP instead of IB, but we did have friends that opted to go for an IB diploma.
Yeah. Also, junior year, let's think what else we did. We did a few AP classes. Which ones?
We did
Language?
We did AP, I believe language.
Yeah,
language.
Yes. Language.
I
forgot it.
You took AP Calc.
Took AP Calc. AB.
We took AP Chem. And another AP History class we took, AP US History.
Right.
And then I think there might have been one.
I don't remember.
There might not have been.
I don't think so.
I don't think so. But then it was also, honors classes on top of all of that too. So.
Right. I also took a creative writing class that year, which I thought was a lot of fun. It was sort of like out of left field for me because I was all the very science math person, and then the creative writing class and my teacher for that class was absolutely incredible, and I started to really love doing it. So it's like something I do in my spare time now that I sort of can talk about saying, hey, I'm not just this science person, I kind of have other interests. And I think that's something you have to remember to do, is because you can't really pigeonhole yourself to being this one type of person. A lot of schools, in my opinion, want you to be more than a one-dimensional person. Like, I mean, you can be brilliant at something, and that's great, but if you don't look more than one-dimensional, you sort of like, yeah, it's not quite as impressive or as good, I guess, as being able to do more than one thing or having more than one type of interest.
No, I completely agree, and I think that, correlates to what life is, especially after college. And, you could have a degree in biology and decide, oh, I'm going to go do something in business. But they want to see, that you can focus on something that you really enjoy, but also have other alternatives, like other passions for other stuff or have interest in other activities. And I think that's a great way of putting it. It's, you're
right.
more of a science, math-oriented person, and then here you are taking a creative writing class and loving it.
Right.
But you can't say that any better. Now moving into your senior year, what were your classes like?
I knew people my senior year who decided that, they were going to slack off a little bit more and they were going to take an easier schedule. And I mean, I did lighten my load a little bit. I opted to take a study hall to give myself like a chance to work on college apps and just to have like a time that wasn't necessarily, a class, but instead just give me time to either, like do creative writing, because that was a class that I decided to take my senior year, or just to, hang out if I didn't have any work to do with like a couple of my friends who were in the same class. It was just nice to have that break. But that being said, I still did take quite a few AP classes. I took.
It was IB English.
It was an IB English class. It was the second year,
HL English,
which is HL English, which is basically equivalent to AP Lit, sort of.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, I took AP Calc A.
AB.
Yes. There we go. AP Calc AB. I took Physics B. And then I took.
You took something else. I remember what it was.
And then
AP
AP Gov. So I mean, I did take my senior year. I did take the most like AP classes. But having the study hall definitely like helped me out. So
AP Physics was my favorite class that year, far and away. I mean, I didn't know how much I liked physics or math until I took that class. It's like I just like doing the experiments in the lab in the room. It's like, as much as it was like a hard class and like the calculations and the science was hard, it was always like a lot of fun to sort of, when you get doing the homework, realizing, oh, this is how this problem works. So for me, that was probably my favorite class of the day, even if it was my hardest.
Well, it's interesting that, taking these AP classes and just high school classes in general really helped, you find an area that you're really interested in.
Right.
It's funny because actually taking AP Chem and AP Physics made me realize how much I really, really like bio. Not that, I didn't necessarily, I did fine in the AP Chem and Physics classes, but as I was going through them and doing the coursework, I realized that yes, this is all interesting and, I'm doing fine in the class, but this really isn't where my passion lies, and that I really do genuinely have, like, a huge interest in biology, and, like, I generally just find it extremely interesting. So I don't know, for me, it kind of, I guess, had like the opposite effect, and it kind of reinforced, like, hey, this is really what I like. But, I guess it works both ways for different people.
Yeah, you're not as big a fan of physics as I was.
No, not at all.
No, that did it for me. Sophomore year, I took AP Biology, and that's when I realized that science was not my thing.
Yeah.
Wasn't how I thought, and I was just like, no.
I mean,
That's
AP is
a lot.
also a very specific way to think, and like I've realized also having taken like one IB class and being able to compare that a little bit to like AP style, that AP style isn't everything. It's one very specific way to learn where you need to know just a little bit about a lot of things.
Yeah.
And I mean, that learning style works for me, but other people, they would much rather focus on a very like narrow amount of information, but learn it so much more in depth.
I still haven't come to any conclusion about which one is more like college. I've had classes that are a little bit like both, so I guess they're both useful.
Do you think there's an advantage to an IP diploma to like having AP awards?
I think an IB diploma, I don't know that there's necessarily any benefit inherently in like, hey, I have an IB diploma. I mean, I think colleges care more like, that you're challenging yourself and that you're taking rigorous classes. But, if an IB diploma is something that you're interested in, then, pursue that.
And possibly if you want to apply to European schools, I hear that like IB is big in Europe, and it's like the whole purpose is that it's the same courses the whole world over. So like European schools do know what that means, but that was never one of my considerations. I was not interested in applying to school in Europe or anything. So.
Interesting. Now let's kind of shift our view more into the SAT and the ACT. Sophomores and juniors take the PSAT. Did you take those?
Yes. We took them. Did we take them freshman year too?
No.
Okay.
We took them sophomore and junior year. They gave them to us. They were.
I did do well enough on my PSATs to qualify for national merit. So that is something that don't blow your PSATs off. It's worth something. Not only just because you can get national merit, which, it can help out scholarship-wise, but, it's also a good indication of, like, where you possibly will stand on your SATs.
I suppose that's the point, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I know people who blew them off, and they just didn't care because they don't count for anything, but, it's almost in your best interest to actually try because it worked out in my favor. Like, I ended up with some scholarship money for national merit, so...
That's great. I mean, I know for me, like, going to my sophomore year, I had no idea the PSAT led into, national merit and all that. I mean, obviously, I didn't really have the math because I was, like, essentially, I took Algebra 1 my freshman year, so I was only in geometry my sophomore year of high school. So that kind of put me at a disadvantage for those, like, standardized tests, and my score probably wasn't as high as it possibly could have been if I was, ahead of the game.
Yeah.
So, I mean... That's amazing that you were able to get that scholarship money. Do you think that's obviously you mentioned it could be a good indicator. Was it a good indicator for you for what you would do on the SAT?
For me, it definitely was. I don't think that was the case. Like for some of our friends, I know, between year to year, even the PSAT is different, and it's all kind of luck of the draw. Even with like the SAT, whether or not you're prepared for the test they decide to give you. Especially for the math part, it's all kind of luck of the draw, whether the math sections focus on stuff that you're well prepared for and can answer the questions, or, sometimes you can take math sections and just be like, I don't even really know how to answer these questions, like I don't know what they're asking.
It's really funny, because I have some friends who are really brilliant at math, and they just look at the SAT questions and look at them. Don't know what they're just like give them back to them. How is this math? They ask me. It's really not math. That is what I've sort of realized having taken these.
I'd say for the PSATs and the SATs, generally speaking, it's not necessarily, there's also some test-taking strategy that goes into it that definitely makes things a little easier. Things like skipping questions and, how you decide to devote your time definitely can help you out.
My favorite section in all those tests, though, was the critical reading by a lot. I was just good at that. Always that stuff.
But I mean, I also have friends who did better their sophomore year than their junior year on, their PSATs. So it's not the end-all, be-all. It's not representative. Things can change. It also depends. The SAT is different every month you take it. So, it's kind of luck of the draw.
I guess there's nothing wrong with taking it more than once anyway. A lot of schools will give you your best scores, or even combine different tests to give you your best scores. So like different sections from different tests. So you can do really well on just a few times. It'd be great. So it's really not. It's important to be prepared, but it's nothing worth freaking out about. You people know, because you know what they're coming. You know for years they're coming. So if you do enough practice and slowly get good at it, you should be fine. Just,
How early? How early on did you start preparing for the SAT or the ACT?
We didn't really do any prep going into the PSAT. It was kind of just, off the cuff. For the most part, I believe.
But we took them junior year, right?
The PSAT, yeah, we did.
No, I mean the SAT. We took them junior year? Which one?
We
took them end of junior year.
Yeah, we took them the end of junior year.
Over the
Sorry.
Summer. We probably started
it's always hard to remember the timeline of everything.
Probably gave it 6 or 7 months of slowly practicing,
right.
Going through books slowly.
Generally speaking, I'm not an amazing test taker, especially for standardized tests. So I definitely went out of my way to get a practice book and to make sure I took a lot of tests to kind of figure out the style of questions I was really well prepared for, especially so that if I saw them on the test, I was like, okay, this is a question I can answer and get it done quickly. And kind of to familiarize myself with styles of questions that every single time I took a test, I wasn't doing well on them, so that I knew, okay, instead of, spending so much time trying to figure out this question, I'm going to skip it and go back to it later. And then, for me, that was something that really helped me improve my score. I think also we did take some test prep class.
For a few weeks.
Just to kind of go over some of especially for the math, there's some strategies for answering math questions because it's not necessarily real math.
Yeah, like I was saying, it's really not math. As much fun as I like calling it math, comparing it to the ACT is much more real in terms of math than the SAT is. The ACT, I liked it much better because I felt like the math section was actually testing my mathematical abilities as opposed to the SAT, which is I took a math class or 2 in college, and the SAT questions were just weirder than anything I got, and anything my professors come up with were, in their most devilish dreams, were not as weird as SAT questions. So.
I think, I don't know, for me, though, because I'd done so much practice to get ready for the SAT, it turned out that my SAT and ACT scores were roughly equivalent. But I found it a lot harder to judge how I was doing as I took the ACT, just because I was a little bit less familiar with generally how the test was. So when I walked out of that, my mom, she was like, how do you think you did? And I looked at her and I was like, I don't know. I could have done fine. I could have done badly. I don't know how to judge.
Right.
Versus I remember walking out of the SAT and being like, I'm relatively sure I did about as well as I possibly could on this.
I think somebody was telling us once that the different tests are popular in different areas of the country, and we're definitely in the area of the country where SAT is more popular. I think it was our college advisor was telling us that the SAT is more popular on the coast and the ACTs are more popular in the
I don't know.
I had this conversation with my college advisor once.
It's the first time I've heard that, so.
Yeah.
I can't remember.
Let's kind of shift, away from the serious side of the college application, or just your journey through high school, and it's kind of look more at the fun stuff in your extracurriculars. Earlier you mentioned you were involved in debate. How involved did you get with that?
I reluctantly, funny enough, got involved in debate, and then it kind of slowly sucked me in and took over my life. Not in the sense that I didn't do anything outside of debate, but it kind of became my predominant extracurricular. That was by the end of my senior year. That was really where I spent most of my my time extracurricular-wise, and I think that it served me well. Not just because it was something that I was passionate about, and because it gave me a chance to kind of learn how to speak in front of a crowd, which was something I was totally uncomfortable with going into high school, but because it gave me an activity to seriously talk about, not just, hey, this is something I do, but hey, this is something I do that I really like and is actually helped me out and made me grow as a person.
Yeah. It was similar for me. I always knew I wanted to do debate ever since I was little. I guess I was argumentative, and this was a natural channel for my argumentativeness that was a good thing. So it was constructive. I actually did rather well at it. I have a few trophies and medals and things lying around, so that was something good to talk about. It was sort of nice to have something on my college application that I could say, hey, I didn't just do this, I did well at this, and that I have awards and I won this.
Right.
I guess, it's definitely just a good thing to have around because speaking skills are not to be underrated. It is useful to learn how to like construct arguments. Like it is something that I don't think much in the way of like classes actually taught me, and that you need in college is how to write a good paper, how to construct a good argument. And your professors will help you definitely learn how to do that. But like for me, having to write debate cases and having to possibly write some papers, but in high school, but not very many of them, I had to learn how to really write arguments. And my English classes in high school, I wrote papers, but I didn't ever have to write a really strong argument for something. And that's something I think you should probably learn how to do before you get to college because it's so helpful.
I mean, there were other extracurriculars that we were involved in. There was book club, there was creative writing, there were, a few other things here and there that we were involved in. But, I mean, at the end of the day, when it came down to it, at least for me, like the extracurricular that when I was filling out my college application, the extracurricular I kind of put down and spent most of my energy like focusing on was, talking about debate, just because to me it felt more worth it to talk about something that I had a lot to say instead of spreading out my entire, I've done all of these things, but I haven't spent that much time on them.
Right. I mean, for me, there was also creative writing, which I spent a lot of time on. What was it? Did junior year did Nanowrimo?
Yeah.
There was like this bizarre, sort of baffling, I don't know, I think sort of thing called Nanowrimo, which is like National Novel Writing Month. And I guess the idea is to get people to write, but the challenge where you have to try to write 50,000 words in the month of November.
But it has to be like a coherent story.
It has to be. Like, let's pretend my story is actually coherent.
It's supposed to be one novel. It's surprisingly more difficult than you'd think to keep a story going for 50,000 words. At one point, my first time. 1,600
words a day.
Yeah. At one point, I got so desperate. I think I had my story set in Louisiana, and I just got so desperate, I just decided to throw Mardi Gras in there because I needed something to fill the space. So, I mean, and that was something I actually did write about for a college essay. I don't remember for which school, but I did write about Nanowrimo.
Right.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I wrote a lot all through middle school. I was huge into it. I was constantly writing different stories, and it is extremely difficult to, carry that on throughout. And you're like, now what? Now what does my character do? And, I focused it a lot in middle school, and when I kind of got into high school, everything just exploded, and I never really had time to do it anymore. But it really did help solidify my writing skills with that. I think it's really interesting that both, your main extracurriculars weren't even science related.
No.
You weren't doing any big science fairs or science Olympiads. You were doing debate and creative writing.
Yeah.
And that shows how diverse you guys are.
I mean, I did I played lacrosse one year too. That was something else that I could talk about. And going into high school, actually, it was interesting. In one of my interviews, this was something that kind of helped me out. I had a question that, they were kind of asking me about extracurriculars, aside from debate. And I ended up talking about lacrosse and, book club, and I also it was interesting because sometimes the things you think are kind of insignificant can, lend a lot to, a conversation in an interview. And I was talking about how going into high school, I figure skated, and then that was something I had to kind of ultimately decide, how I was going to focus my energy, and that was something I decided to give up in favor of pursuing debate and lacrosse. But, it was just interesting that it ended up being something that kind of was just it lent itself well to talking about, this, I don't just do one thing, I have, I've tried out multiple, different aspects of, I guess, life.
Yeah. It's people just I guess honestly what should be said is that there's always those people who fill up their resumes with tons of things, but in my experience, having one or two things you're passionate about and actually do consistently is better.
Right.
All the interviews I've ever had with anybody, they were much happier to have me talk about what I like to do and who I am as a person based on those things, rather than having me list a laundry list of things I do sometimes.
Yeah. At the end of the day, I think passion and investing yourself in something and showing hey, you're really committed to something and care about it matters more.
No, I completely agree. Now let's kind of, shift our attention more to the college application process. You're going into your senior year. Not only do you have several AP classes on your belt, but now you've got, depending how many colleges you're applying to, you've got essays, you've got resumes, you've got recommendations to gather around. How many colleges were you guys applying to? Where were you applying? What were you looking for when you were applying to colleges?
Okay, so for me, so University of Chicago has an early action option. So one of the first things that I decided I was going to do was apply early action to University of Chicago and see how that went. And then kind of from there, I formed like two kind of contingencies. One being like if I get a yes from University of Chicago, and one being I get a no. And the idea kind of was that if I got a yes from University of Chicago, it wasn't really worth my time to apply to schools that I wasn't going to consider over University of Chicago. Just because, there are 101, there's like multitudes of really great schools out there. But at the end of the day, if I have a yes to like a school like University of Chicago that I really did like when I toured the school, then it was really only worth my time to apply to a school that I would consider picking over. And then if I got a no, then, there were other schools that I liked but didn't like as much as the school that I would also like add to the list. So, I mean, that was my general strategy. So I filled out University of Chicago application on the Common App, and I filled out one or two others. And then I had like a couple of other ones kind of sort of started, but I didn't really put all that much effort into them until I heard back from the school, was what my plan was.
What I did is there was this program Emory has with Georgia Tech, and it was this biomedical engineering program that you get a degree from Emory and a degree from Georgia Tech in biomedical engineering, two of them in 5 years. And I was strongly considering that for a while. So I had done all the work I needed to do for that. I filled out the paperwork, submitted that application. I also submitted like an early action sort of thing for U Chicago and Yale. And I was going to see what happened. And it came to the point where I got into Yale, sorry, didn't get into Yale, got into U Chicago, and then got into the Emory thing. I had to sort of make a decision because I debated applying to other places after that. And this was like December, so the applications for most schools were coming up, and I had time to work on them. But I heard back early for the schools I wanted to apply to. And I decided that as cool as the Emory program at Georgia Tech is, I'd be happier at Chicago. So I didn't apply to other ones. But much like Emily, I did have a list of schools I would apply to otherwise. I had like things that were Vanderbilt on there, and other like Caltech or things like that on a list of schools. I had looked at their application, looked what they needed. Though honestly, the most stressful part of the entire experience was one of my teachers had left the year before, and we had asked them to write a recommendation letter for us, and it was coming up to like first week of November, right before the applications were due, and we had not gotten ours back. And we were all in a tizzy waiting for him, and these letters got there the day before they had to be sent out, and it
was stressful. We had to get extra letters in case it didn't all work out, and it was stressful.
So my big advice is make sure you start these processes really early, because waiting until the last minute like that was not something we should have done, not something I would have liked to do. Starting the common application when it first comes out is a good thing. Do that. I think this year it crashed when it first came out, so trying to get started on these things early would prevent problems like that from being life-ruining and causing tons of stress.
For me, I guess going back to what I was saying before, once I got into University of Chicago, I kind of limited my list down to, I believe, University of Miami, Duke, and Emory. I think that's it. I only really applied to a few schools that I was seriously considering. If I get into these schools, it's going to be a difficult decision for me to actually decide, what is it that I want to do. And at the end of the day, I ended up choosing University of Chicago, obviously. But it was a tough decision for a while, where I did kind of agonizingly go back and forth and kind of just was really uncertain with what the right choice was for me. Just because they're all good schools, and no matter where you go, most likely you're gonna end up happy. So it's kind of how do you, when you get down to that point, it's kind of.
I don't think I've met anybody who's truly unhappy with the school they're at.
You know, and I mean, so I mean, for me, I had to like sleep on it for a while, and waiting for like the University of Chicago decision to come back was kind of like nerve-wracking because, you know, there was.
Didn't it come back right around our birthday?
It did. It came back the day of our birthday, actually. So it was a really great birthday present, but it was kind of one of those days where it was just like, well, this can either be the greatest birthday ever, or it's going to be a really, really sucky birthday. Like, you know, there's really no in between. Because I knew at that point, like, I really wanted to get into the school. Like, I toured there, and, you know, just the more I, like, read about the school and, like, learned about the school, and even, like, applying for the school made me realize, like, how much I really like it. Especially because University of Chicago is the one school that has, like, really wacky essay topics. Like, every year they're very different.
That was a good thing to mention.
It's usually 5 different topics, and then there's like always a 6th that's kind of just like write about something, anything you want, as long as it has some, I guess, some sort of merit and goal. Our year there were some pretty interesting topics. The one I chose to write is where is Waldo really? Like, that was the essay question. So you take that question and you go wherever you want with it.
Wasn't there also another topic about like presents? Like,
yeah, and I almost did write one that was talking about presents or like the present, like as in, you know, time, but also talking about presents as in like the item you receive like on your birthday or whatnot. And the prompt was something along the lines of invent a past for a present you received. And there was another question I briefly considered that was basically like write about your arch nemesis, imagined or real.
Right. They're just really weird topics.
Yeah, they're bizarre topics, and they're designed not to have you write, you know, the standard, what do you like? There is, you know, what do you like? Why do you want to go to the University of Chicago? What do you like about the school topic? I think that one was limited to like 500, 250, 500 words.
250 words.
It was like really short. Like, they wanted to know why you were interested in the school, but that wasn't necessarily like their predominant interest. So for the weird essays, really they just kind of want to see like how you think, you know, what you can do with kind of a bizarre topic. I know one year there was a topic that was don't write about reverse psychology, and that was it. That was the prompt, so you could go with that wherever you wanted. They're just really interested in like seeing how you think, what you think. There's no limit.
And there's no right answer. That's like that's the key thing to stress, because if you have friends who are planning to Chicago, considering it, they're going to be worried about the topic because they're weird.
They are weird.
They actually poll like the alumni and the students for these topics, so people like us are coming up with them, and people who are my classmates, and we have some pretty interesting people at the school, and they come up with some interesting topics. But on that note, we all know what they're supposed to be, and you're supposed to not have a right answer.
Right.
So you're getting weird essay topics from us because we know what they're looking for.
Right.
And the administration loves us giving them these topics because they know that writing these topics correctly means you have to be okay with not having a right answer.
Right.
And that is something you have to realize before you sit down and start writing these, is that you're not supposed to have a right answer. You're supposed to say something interesting, something insightful, but you could be wrong.
Right.
And there's no way to be right.
I mean, for me, my advice is also don't just jump into it. Like, if you're going to write essays for University of Chicago, like, seriously consider the different options and, you know, give it some thought. For me, my essay kind of came like a moment of insight. I was actually talking about the essay topics with my mom and joking around, and suddenly decided, you know, bam, what if Waldo was at the Night Circus, which is a setting for a book called The Night Circus, which is one of my favorite books and was at the time a book I'd recently just read. And it all kind of just came together in like one moment. And funny enough, I did have the chance to meet with the admissions, the person who like read the applications for South Florida for our school a couple of times. I think it's changed since then, but I did meet with him a couple of times, and every time he was just like, you know, I really loved your essay because it was so different, so original, like no one else did that. You know, it was something that was completely out of the box.
Yeah.
So
it's along the lines of people who've written like printed like scripts and short creative writing pieces for the essays, because those are totally valid options for some of these questions.
I believe someone turned in poetry once.
Yes.
I think it's a great way to see how you tick and how you think. I mean, you obviously referenced one of your favorite books. That gives the admissions officer an insight into what you're like and what you know, what interests you. Yeah. I know my cousin, she went to the University of Chicago, and one of her essay questions was define X. And I was thinking about that, and I was like, there's so many different options. Like, not a lot of the schools I applied to had a lot of, like, more creative answers, like, or questions. But there was, like, one where it was, you had to use the word penguin, boss, and, like, something else. And I wrote a story where a girl writes, like, gets hit by a skateboarder, and she's obsessed over her phone, and she's like, oh my gosh, there's so much on that phone. She's watching her phone, like, go flying in the air, and it turns out that this kid that just hit her is her boss's kid. And I, like, did all these crazy stuff, but I loved that essay, and it was probably my favorite ones because it was just so different, and, you're able to be creative with it instead of writing I want to go here because you can get very cookie cutter with that kind of stuff, so.
My Night Circus, like, University of Chicago essay turned out to be the easiest essay I ever had to write for a college. It wasn't necessarily, like, the longest essay I had ever I wrote. I mean, it wasn't really all that long. But, it was just one of those things where I sat down to write it, and then I didn't struggle. Like, I just sat down, and once I had an idea of where I was going, it was easy.
That should be the goal for this essay, I think.
Right.
Because they're really looking for how you think, and people with the really strange essays, like the poetry and the scripts, they all got into the school. That's why we hear about them. And they really just want to know how you think. And I think standard essays want that too, but it's a little bit harder for those because there is, I guess, it's hard to say a right answer, but there is a definite direction you should be taking these essays.
Yeah.
And the same advice sort of applies, that you should really know what you're writing beforehand, sort of think about it, but it's a little bit harder to put yourself into an essay
where it's like, what, I just think you remember for Emory, the essay was basically, why do you want to go to Emory? And I mean, I did a lot of research and tried to come up with, like, a couple of, unique, interesting ideas, like, why do I want to go to Emory? But I remember at first, like, struggling and just kind of jotting down thoughts that when I read them back later, they were so generic that it was literally to the point where if I could have taken out Emory, put in a blank, and replaced it with another school's name, and it would have been perfectly valid.
I think I saw for the CDC for that, though. No, one of us saw for the CDC.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think with college essays, generally speaking, the key is to try to find something that's not so cookie cutter, even if the essay is, why do you want to come to our school? You just have to kind of try to find a way to talk about something you're interested that the school offers that isn't necessarily like, oh, this is a great school, it's in a great city, Talk about, I think for the Emory essay, I did talk about the CDC and talk about how, not only is it in Atlanta, but there's something like the CDC as, like, a perspective, resource or something that you could even just, like, go and visit or internship or something that, makes the school, like, more unique than, I can't replace the name Emory and talk about the CDC for too many other schools kind of thing.
Yeah. My other major piece of advice is don't reuse essays. We had the guy from Chicago who came to speak to our school, and he mentioned how, like, people from other good universities sometimes call him up on the phone that he's friends with. Like, he had been a admissions officer elsewhere, and, like, you guys have good essays this year.
Yeah.
Because the schools do talk. Yeah. They do know what essays are for which school. Don't use them. I
mean, if you're going to reuse an essay, don't you reuse the University of Chicago essays. They're extremely distinct. Those are the essays that if you reuse them, they're going to know because there's no other school out there that asks questions like, where's Waldo? Or they talk about rainbow mantis shrimp or, all of these other things. Or, like, compare apples and oranges. Like, there's just no other school out there that does that.
No, that's a great point. I mean, it's some great advice on essays, too. It's such an important component of the college application process. It provides someone who's spending maybe 3 minutes on your application an insight into who you are, how you think, and what you like to do. And I think it's, something people just should not take lightly. It's something you need to take, you never know when you'll get your inspiration for it. You could be in the shower.
Also, the only other advice I have is I definitely, took advantage of, like, people around me to, like, proofread and just kind of refine my essays. And, that's something I think people shouldn't be afraid to do. Just generally speaking, I had my college advisor read my essays. I had my mom read my essays. I had, my dad read my essays. I had people read my essays, not to change what I said, but kind of just to make sure that, what I wanted to say was getting across and kind of to help me with, sometimes grammar or wording or just to proofread and make sure sometimes, you think you know what you're writing, but then when other people read it, they have no idea what you're writing. just little things like that also can make a huge difference.
Yeah,
Polish.
it would be sort of embarrassing to have an essay with a bunch of grammar mistakes that you could have got somebody else to
Right.
briefly glance and see them.
And there's always
That's sort of what you want to try to avoid.
And there's always those people who accidentally turn in an essay that has the wrong school in it. Don't do that. Stuff like that.
Yeah, I know people, like in my brother's class, some of his friends did that, and I was like, oh no. And the admissions officer actually contacted one of them and was like, hey, this doesn't look really good, and he quickly changed it and sent it back. But it is something you have to be really careful with. Now, giving advice, more on the advice side, but, for students that are potentially going to go visit the University of Chicago, what would be a restaurant or any hangout or something in Chicago, given how big of a city it is, what would be the one place that they have to go and see?
Med.
Yeah, the Med. There's a restaurant not too far from campus that we go to.
Everybody goes to.
Everyone goes to, and it's not only just a restaurant, but they do have like an attached bakery where you can go and get like sandwiches or ice cream or shakes, and it's called the Medici. It's not like the best food you'll ever have, but
it's like the best, like, Chicago, University of Chicago is like a little neighborhood called
Right.
Hyde Park, and the best way to get a feel of Hyde Park is to go sit at the Medici and, like,
Right.
just eat some food and, like, watch people who go by, because it's a very cute little neighborhood inside
Right.
Chicago. It's
Hyde Park's great.
20 minutes from downtown, but the place is sort of like a cute little neighborhood-ish area, and the Medici's really good food, really good shakes.
Yeah, shakes are really
Been
good.
there forever. It's like almost school tradition at this point to like get food from there.
Yeah.
Like on Saturday nights, you'll see lines of people out the door
Right.
trying to get seating at the
Yeah.
Medici, or
Especially-
especially in the spring when they have like their
Right.
rooftop patio seating.
Yeah.
It's beautiful out.
Yeah.
It's a
Just-
great way
yeah.
to like unwind after a long week.
It sounds like a great place to go, because I kind of want to go there right now, because,
Yeah.
food, and then ice cream, milkshakes, like, what else could you possibly need?
And every couple of weeks they'll like change one of the shakes, so it's like a different shake, and you go sometimes and they're like, oh hey, new shake, it's birthday cake this week, or it's like a milkshake, or it's just kind of nice.
They sell fresh
Little
bread, too.
variety.
I would have gained a freshman 15, hands down. I would have needed, like, fat pants and skinny pants.
Yes.
Well, guys, it's
Pretty good.
been great talking to you.
Yeah.
What you have said has truly been really informational, and what you've done, what you've accomplished throughout high school to get where you're at is just amazing. You've really diverse individuals that prove that just because you're a science-minded person doesn't mean you have to do everything science, and doesn't mean you can do other stuff and can be completely unrelated.
Exactly.
Yes, and my really lasting piece of advice is for people to not freak out, because it is all manageable, but people freak out, and then it makes it much harder to actually get all of it done. If you're so in a tizzy, you can't think straight. It all works out.
Exactly. It all ends up okay.
Yeah, great. Thank you, guys, and we hope that for our audience, we hope to tune into our next episode.